Thank you, John, and thanks for that kind introduction. I have to say I love John's energy and dedication to good public policy, and I was really happy I could be with you today. I'm honored and a little bit daunted to be among so many people who are true experts in the connection between water and energy, and I'm here as much of the day as I can, much more to learn than I am to share. I thought this morning it was just a great array of talented and inspiring speakers and actors in the field, and I think I was frankly ready to and did cut out a lot of my talk after Lori Park spoke right at the beginning of the evening, and I offered to give her my time this afternoon so you could hear more. And then I was ready to suggest cloning Grant Davis and Ben Hornstein, and maybe I'll add you, Harlan, to that list. Or in the alternative, find a way to force water agencies to integrate across flood, water supply, water quality, and energy at the regional level. If we did those things, we'd pretty much be done, I think. A couple of disclaimers, and I'm really just going to share some thoughts with you again as a non-expert. One thing that I actually have to say is I can't talk on behalf of my fellow board members, so I can't speak on behalf of the board. I can only speak on behalf of myself, and seriously, that's really a rule that I learned in my ethics training. And a part of that, it makes sense that because we're a 5-member board and we can only talk really about a substantive issue in public session, that's actually true, but I do feel fairly confident as a matter of a guess, of course, that my colleagues are not going to take issue with anything I'm going to say today. A second, I'm not an energy expert, although I am catching up as fast as I can, and actually I'm not really an expert in anything. I found, for those of you who know me, I'm more of an expert generalist, but you need those too. I just want to point out. A colleague of mine at EPA used to refer to herself as an eminent anecdotalist, which I really, really love. Barbara Spark, if any of you knew her. But I think I'm going to stick with expert generalist. And my colleague, and there's value there, my colleague Fran Spivey Weber, who you heard from last year, really is our expert on these issues on the board, and I'm delighted that I'm able to defer to her. And then finally, third, I just have to say at heart, I'm really just a sewer geek. And those of you who know me know that's true. And I love that it said water, power, sewer. And it was probably because it fits sort of in a droplet. But I'm old enough to not like I like sludge rather than biosolids. And it's just who I am. And those of you who know, it's not that I can't hold a job. I just keep having opportunities to do sort of interesting things. And Tim's probably heard me say this more than anyone, but I refer to myself as the original my karma ran over my dogma person, because I think this is the 5th job that I've had where someone asked me to do something at an entity where I said it ought to do something, and was somewhat critical. I'm not going to say what I used to say about the state board, but let me just say I'm dedicated to changing that impression, and that I've been delighted to come there and really impressed with the staff and my colleagues. And again, I will say I was out of this world for almost 10 years, other than the part-time Delta Stewardship Council, and I really have been impressed to come back. But at heart, I am a sewer geek, and the public works experience that I had back in Los Angeles really changed my life. And I'll talk a little bit about some of that, because I think some of those lessons are going to be essential to doing the kind of integration that we've been talking about. So when I think about the water energy nexus, I immediately go down 2 distinct paths. One of them is about the interesting data, facts, issues, opportunities, et cetera, that are presented by dealing with this convergence. I mean, for anyone, it's got to be a dream for certain engineers, anyone who wants to integrate and figure out how to problem solve and make things work. This is just phenomenal. It's phenomenally complex, but it's a wonderful opportunity, a challenge to think about. The other path I go down, and this isn't going to surprise those of you who've known me for a long time, is about the human dynamic. That some people have mentioned already this morning, of reaching across these disciplines, these very different worlds, and what it actually takes to make that happen. And I think it requires as much intention as all of the other stuff, and I know that's my bias. I really think it's frankly more challenging than teaching water geeks about electrons, or how the CPUC procures energy, which is I still don't get that exactly. I'm working on it though. Or teaching energy experts about how water really flows in California, and the laws of physics there are just a factor. whereas the laws of physics are what must be obeyed. In electricity, see, I'm learning. And many of you know that I'm fond of saying that our biggest challenge in making progress on all of these issues isn't the data or the hardware. It's in fact the challenge of ecosystem management. It's dealing with the people in front of us in a thoughtful way and being frankly even aware of ourselves in a more mindful and conscious way than pure intellect provides. And I know, I have been called the Donna Reed of the environmental movement because I want everybody to get along. I'm dating myself for those of you who are younger, and I am not going to explain it. But I would just say that Donna usually got her way, and I feel like I have too. And so I'm going with ecosystem management. And I think it's, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this in the short time I have today, but I really wanted to make the point up front that making this integration work is going to take working on how we consciously think about the integration of the issues and the people as much as the challenging facts we need to marshal, and those are challenging. And it becomes all the more important as we enter a phase of adaptive management, frankly, versus building a big thing and letting it do its work for 30 or 40 years till we might have to replace it, and even if we have to replace it in a different way, which seemingly has served us pretty well for a long time. It's true in the waste arena by itself, it's true in the water arena by itself, it's true in the energy arena in it of itself, as we see the diversification and the distribution in all of those areas that are just fundamentally different from the way we managed all three of them 20 years ago. And then to add to that, working across disciplines requires an even more nimble set of minds and an open set of hearts, quite frankly. So I'm going to just share some observations and predictions about what we're up to, just to toss into the mix of all the things that people are talking about today. And I'm not going to be complete, and maybe they're not as relevant to many of you, but so I'm going to talk briefly now and then just look forward to the months and years ahead, working with you and in finding the better ways to work together, because we're not going to make it unless we find ways to work more quickly, more collaboratively, and in a more integrated fashion. That's my overall theme for today. And I really think part of it, and this is an approach and attitude that I think my colleagues all share, I'm pretty darn sure that they share it as well as the staff, is an understanding that the solutions to the problems we face are going to require a lot of different solutions on the part of a lot of different people, and that the answers are not going to come from on high in grand plans from Sacramento, but a combination of those of us in the regulatory world doing our jobs under federal and state law and common sense through a combination of regulation in some cases, but also figuring out how to recognize wisdom from elsewhere and figuring out how to reward it or just get out of the way. I did ask the barrier question, and I was delighted that we didn't come up at the top of the list, but I invite you to tell me when we are. So what are the areas to watch? Obviously, water and energy are intrinsically linked, and we've been naive not to think about it. And we heard stats today. I'll give you a few more about all of the energy it takes to move and treat, distribute, and retreat wastewater, which is then generally dumped into a water body of some sort. Occasionally it's injected. Inland, it becomes someone else's drinking water. They just don't think of it that way. And so when people have a problem with recycled water, I'm always saying, what do you think the Mississippi River is? In any event, but that's a whole nother story that water geeks know generally, but other people don't. On the coast, it goes to the ocean, when with, I'm going to say just a little bit more, and I'm not minimizing the expense, particularly of the purple pipe and stuff, but with a little more, it could be treated for reuse as it's beginning to be around the country. I mean, the outfall at the Hyperion treatment plant in Los Angeles, which I had the honor of helping to preside over after having the dubious honor of having terrorized as an environmental lawyer at the beginning, is actually the size of the 6th largest river in California. I might not have that right because it's what I've heard, but it's not that far off. And the estimate the Water Board has of the amount of water that we're sending out outfalls into coastal California is 5 million acre feet a year. We have goals of recycling, I think 2 million of that by 2030. But again, if you think about an opportunity, it's a challenging opportunity, but there's an opportunity sitting right there, right in front of our faces. So water and energy are intrinsically linked. Energy and climate are intrinsically linked, at least for now, when alternative sources, although growing, are still in their infancy, and when we need fossil fuel generation to even make alternative sources realistically available because of voltage and timing and peak and all those sorts of things. So So as a result, water and climate are intrinsically linked. I'm not even going to talk about some of the things that Paul talked about how climate is making water more challenging. So obviously water use efficiency and conservation are truly energy conservation and a key element of dealing with GHG emissions. You all know that, but let me tell you the stats that we're using, and I stand ready to be correct. I think they're from the CPUC. And some of them you've heard already, that electrical use for water is more than 90% of the energy used. Gas is over 30% of gas use is for water treatment, heating, and stuff like that. Groundwater pumping is 2% of all the electricity used. Groundwater pumping in summer uses more electricity than the State Water Project, the Colorado Aqueduct, and the CVP combined. Leaks in urban water systems are 283 billion gallons of loss a year, which translates into 2.5 million megawatts, enough to take care of 370,000 homes. You might not know that one. We have 4,600 gallons per megawatt hour of energy generated, and even solar parabolic needs 800 to 1,000 per megawatt hour produced. And then obviously you have the balance of hydro for being able to ramp up quickly for peak, and for balance has a challenge of environmental impact on the aquatic side sometimes, but we're seeing a huge expansion in pump storage projects being proposed and that we have to review in our 401 cert. So our clearest set of efforts that have been referred to today are in helping lead the WetCat team for the state, which is work closely to help CARB develop its plans for reaching our greenhouse gas reduction targets. The stats I mentioned make clear that water efficiency is an obvious and critical piece of that solution. Franz Spivey-Weber, one of my colleagues who you heard from last year, co-leads the team with Mark Cowan, the director of the Department of Water Resources, and she talked last year, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that. In fact, I think I'm just going to mention the key elements: water use efficiency, recycling, water system energy efficiency, reuse of urban runoff, which I am going to talk about in a moment because it hasn't been talked about a lot today already, increasing renewable energy production for the water sector, and then prioritizing dollars spent to deal with these issues. And many of you are involved in the effort, so I appreciate and welcome your comments or even answers to any questions that may come up. There are other things, though, that we're doing in addition to that, and I just want to mention a few. There are cross-agency activities happening of all kinds, and one of the ones that I really appreciate and is relevant today is the fact that CARB has helped fund 2 staff to help on this issue. One, Max Gomberg, who works with Fran at the Water Board, and the other is Meredith Youngheim at the CPUC, who happily you're going to hear from later today, and she can answer every question that you have for me. Finally, the other example I want to talk about has to do with stormwater. And this is something that could be a really long conversation or the subject of a whole talk, but I think it's illustrative of the approach we're trying to take. I mean, we're in the midst of finalizing a series of permits that many of your institutions may touch in some way or another that have been pretty controversial. I would say we're not decades late in renewing these major permits, maybe a decade late. Sorry, this is one of those things I used to complain about. And we're almost done with this fleet of general permits that we've been doing. In some ways, it's more efficient to do them at a general permit level for municipal small municipalities, for construction, for Caltrans. We're about to finish one for industrial general permit, and we are going to be hearing appeals of 2 large city permits. These are the stormwater permits that limit how much, let's just say waste of all kinds go into the ocean from stormwater, because we did such a good job on sewage treatment that this is in many ways the next frontier, but a more challenging one because it comes from so many diffuse sources. Well, both in thinking about how to complete our permits and dealing with an issue that maybe 2 of you know, receiving water limits and the appeals of these permits, and in our small community permit, we put in a placeholder to try and allow an alternative path for compliance so that local communities aren't spending all their money just dealing with our water quality issue, but if they can come up with a plan that will deal with water quality at the same time it is dealing with flood control, water supply, can be urban greening. Let's just call it multiple benefits. We're going to create a space for them to do it. It may take a little bit longer, but it's going to be better for all of us from an energy perspective and from a money perspective. And having come from local government, I'm really not inclined to want to force local government to spend money in separate silos when there's a better answer where people can be greening their communities. And happily, there are just a slew of incredible things happening on the ground, particularly in Southern California, but not exclusively in Southern California, where, for example, the city of Los Angeles has taxed itself voluntarily $500 million to start doing green space, urban filtration, some of the swales you saw in one of Harlan Kelly's slides, et cetera, so that you're getting green space in a desperately park poor area or a nature poor area, and you're going to end up with flood control, water supply, and water quality benefits. And we're just at the beginning of that. And I would say as soon as we finish this next permit, you'll be seeing us work on our stormwater strategy. And it's really geared around finding incentives and accelerating low impact development, those sorts of projects, and also moving towards source control as an answer so that we're not putting it all on communities at the bottom. So that's a very big area that has a lot of energy implications that we haven't totally quantified, but we know are there. Another area I wanted to mention, and this could be a whole talk, is the whole notion of contaminated groundwater, which is more than a notion, of course. But I would say this is the biggest issue we're dealing with, other than it would be stormwater, contaminated groundwater, and Bay Delta would be the big three for us, even though we're doing other things, and all of them have an energy nexus. I'm happy to talk about this. It is a huge area. It's probably my top priority at the moment, but the amount of contaminated groundwater across this state is appalling, and it's been mentioned in terms of some of the bond discussion and elsewhere. I mean, nitrate contamination in particular across the state is a huge challenge, but it's particularly a challenge for drinking water. It's not really a challenge for agriculture because you can pump and fertilize. So we have a very narrow opportunity where we do have ag and disadvantaged communities agreeing that the focus should be on helping drinking water. And part of what's come out of that, it has been a push. I don't think it's going to make it through the legislature this term, but it's going to happen either way because the governor can do it in other forum to combine the Department of Public Health's drinking water program with the state board only, and I'll say this is really the reason, to have a full sense of the water cycle, which will allow us to be able to work on things like the recycled water policies, et cetera, to sort of move some of those things ahead while still protecting public health with the fine staff that come from public world. I can't tell you what the mechanism will be. Will it be a budget? Will it be a formal reorg? Will the legislature ultimately end up doing it? They'll have an opportunity to weigh in. There'll be a task force. It'll be, some of you will be on it even though you don't know it. We'll be looking at everything more holistically, and that, of course, will include energy. And there's more I could say about that. In the urban context, a huge issue where people are trying to find ways to use the groundwater basins in Southern California. Many have been doing it for years, even on Superfund sites. Just go to the San Gabriel Valley Water Quality Authority, and it's pretty incredible what they're doing, but trying to find ways to do distributed storage. And that is true in groundwater storage in the Central Valley. It's also true in urban Los Angeles, where people are coming together to try and figure out, in part because we have this tremendous opportunity with recycled water and capturing stormwater, but you got to put it somewhere. So it's true across the board. Bay Delta, I'm not going to get into other than to say energy is a piece of it. Obviously, we have to look at the hydropower impacts of some of what we're doing, but we're balancing against other things. I mean, the beauty of what the state board does in that context is that our job is to maximize all beneficial uses, not pick a winner, not pick losers, not decide our favorites, but to figure out how to maximize things. And I think that's part of my favorite thing to do, just because it puts you in that space of trying to figure out how to maximize things for everyone. And there's a lot more that I could say that we're working and putting energy conservation into permits and things when we can, et cetera. But I know we're going to run out of time. So I just want to say, oh, really? I'm doing pretty well. Well, let me go back to this page. No, that's why I'm talking really fast. Sorry. But I think how we shape this work actually is in part up to you all and your colleagues. And frankly, we're looking at you for models and for better ideas than we could come up with ourselves, and ideas that have durability and doability, and not just for you, but as a model for others. And I really think this gets back to how I opened. The wisdom about how to solve problems fairly and effectively actually comes from folks who do things, as opposed to folks who tell other people to do things, or people who tell other people to do things. And I have been in all of those roles, and I really value the doers, and I valued a job. This is a little closer to the doer, but I'm still someone who tells other people how to do things, and I much prefer being someone who does things. But I do think breakthroughs happen in this space when you create the space for them to happen. I just want to pledge to you that we really are trying to create that space. Only one Yogi Berra quote today. I know that will just disappoint so many of you. But in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice. In practice, there is. And that's, I'll go with practitioners every time. And I am optimistic, even though this seems pretty daunting, not just because the alternative is too depressing to contemplate, but because of what I see after taking a 7 to 10 year break from the water world in general and going into land conservation, and then more generally working institutionally at NRDC, other than a little bit of the Delta work that I did. And I see a huge difference in this field from where I left it in 2000, January 20th, I believe, 2001 at 9 a.m. It's when I lost that job. Sent my last all-staff voicemail at 8:30 a.m. and then settled in with my cup of coffee to watch the inauguration. But I'm optimistic because overall what I see across the state is this incredible tide of local or regional efforts to deal with water intelligently and in a more integrated way. So despite the north-south divide that sometimes makes more of the headlines, you know, people down south who depend on the Delta for 30% of their water and another 30% from the Colorado River, which we don't talk about enough, the folks are working furiously to reduce their reliance on imported sources. They're amazing plans. But I have pulled together, as I said, groups of people who had never been in a room together from the regulatory agencies, from water agencies, to talk about what we can do to speed up the cleanup of contaminated basins in urban Southern California, or even just to figure out how to remove barriers for being able to use them for storage. And it was so exciting. By the end of just a day and a half meeting, all these guys were ready to go straight to direct potable reuse. There were a lot of engineers in the room, but and I just said, sometimes the right engineering answer takes a little bit of a while, but it was great energy, and those folks are continuing to meet. Also in LA, I mentioned what the city of LA is doing, but that did come out of analysis 20 years ago that a group called Tree People started doing, where they started laying out what the cost was of importing water, treating it for drinking water, putting it in to the system, going to a wastewater plant, and then flushing it out to the ocean at the same time as we were spending money on flood control in Los Angeles, which was sending just a ton of water out to the ocean as fast as possible, all very well intentioned in their own space. But they actually came up with a calculator that talked about how much money all these agencies at the state and local level were spending to do these things separately, and including energy, and how much money could be saved locally. And they actually got County Public Works Department, this is way back now in the 90s eventually, to give them what came to be $100 million to retrofit one watershed, and apologize for not just letting them do it for the whole county, but they felt they couldn't go that far. And there are whole communities there that I really recommend you go see, where they've put cisterns and roof gutter catchments and permeable surfaces and swales to capture water. They're doing a massive wetlands park, etc. And it's just exciting to go down there and see that happening, particularly in an urban area that is so park poor. Under the integrated water management planning process, which there's only a brief mention of today, and I'm hoping becomes a big part of whatever bond happens whenever it happens, it's amazing what's happened with people coming together, initially because of the promise of grant funding dangling in front of them, but then something happens when water managers end up in the same room and finally meet each other. They like to solve problems. So there are things happening all over the place, whether it's in the Kings River or, gosh, you name it, all over the San Joaquin Valley, the Sac Valley, just as that innovation is happening in Southern California. And this job has been really inspiring to see what people are doing, because amazing things happen at the local level when people can look each other in the eye and reach across divides to solve a common problem for their community. And I think our issue is to figure out how to set the bottom line and create a level playing field and to spark the conversation at times, but really to figure out how to help or get out of the way. So with that, I think we all have the native tools to do this, but we just have to think about them and think about using the tools that we have. And I'm really optimistic that things will work out if we all pay attention to this and figure out how to foster that, whatever it is, the better angels of our nature that it takes for us to see this as a collective and then ask those of us in government and elected officials and others to give us the tools we need to really make it happen, because the vision is really there. So thank you for letting me join you today. It's been terrific so far.